Hi everyone, in this tutorial I am going to talk about labor economics. In particular, I will look at different budget constraints and different labor supplies according to this budget constraints. And I will also talk about the Self-Sufficiency program, which is a welfare program. And we're going to look at the effect of this program on the labor supply of the participants. Let's get into it. Consider an individual who has non-labor income Y0 and who works a positive amount of hours at the wage rate W. Using an income leisure choice diagram, illustrate his labor supply decision. So, we can start by representing the budget constraint, the red line, which doesn't go all the way down to 0 because our individual has an income equal to Y0 that he can use to consume even if he doesn't work. One of the requirements of the question says that he works a positive amount of hours at the wage rate W. So there is going to be an interior solution where an indifference curve will be tangent to the budget line. The objective of our individual is to maximize his utility by looking for the highest possible indifference curve. The highest possible indifference curve is going to have to touch one way or another the budget constraint. Any point, any bundle above the budget set is not affordable. Hence, the highest possible indifference curve our individual can reach will be located at the tangency point between the budget constraint and the indifference curve. Now imagine that our individual gets married. His partner earns a substantial amount of money. How will that affect his labor supply? I am assuming here that if his partner earns a substantial amount of money, some of this money at least will be shared with the individual. So now, for our individual, the wage rate hasn't changed. Our individual is still paid the same per hour. However, he's going to benefit from a higher non-labor income coming from his partners. So Y0 could say increase to Y1. Our agent then is richer for the same amount of hours worked. So there is going to be an income effect that is going to make our individual work less. Note that here we are not talking about a substitution effect because the substitution effect is relative to the price ratio, the wage rate divided by the price. Here, this measure doesn't change. Our individual doesn't get promoted or demoted, and the price of consumption doesn't change. So, we only have an income effect, and that should decrease the labor supply of our individual. Let's see how it looks on a graph. The new budget constraint in orange is a shifted version of the red budget constraint, vertically shifted. The shift here corresponds to the difference between Y1 and Y0. This is the supplement that the partner brought after getting married. Now, if we look for the tangency point between the highest indifference curve and the new budget line, we will find a tangency point located at a higher level of consumption and a higher level of leisure, which means our individual is taking some time off. He can consume more than before thanks to this non-labor income, and he can even consume more than before without having to work as much. So he's going to work less on one hand, and he will also be able to consume more on the other hand. The income effect in general makes people work less. The substitution income, in general, the substitution effect, makes people work more. If you are getting paid more per hour, the opportunity cost of leisure then increases. By taking an hour off, you are giving up on a higher amount of money than before. And you have a trade-off here. On one hand, you get paid more per hour, so you're richer on average, and you would like, you're richer overall, so you might want to take some time off. On the other hand, the opportunity cost of leisure has increased. So taking an hour off means giving up on a higher wage. So you might want to work more. Which effect is going to dominate depends on people's preferences. Now, kind of related to this exercise, here is a question related to the labor supply of partners in a couple. The elasticity of labor supply is defined as the percentage change in the labor supply when the wage rate increases by 1%. Similar to the price elasticity of demand, the percentage change in the quantity consumed when the wage increases by 1%, when the price increases by 1%, Here, we look at the quantity of hours supplied by an individual, and we look at how this quantity changes when the wage, the price of leisure, increases by 1%. Is the labor supply more elastic for men or women? And why do you think that is? Remember that a more elastic supply means that if the wage rate increases by 1%, an individual will react more by changing his working hours by a substantial amount. On the other hand, if labor supply is inelastic, our individual is working the same number of hours no matter how much he is getting paid. Empirical studies have found that the labor supply for women is more elastic, so it reacts to changes in the wage more than the labor supply of men. The idea is that women, more often than not, are secondary earners in a household. So usually, maybe I shouldn't say usually, but it is more common to see households rely on the income of the men than on the income of the woman to function. So men tend to react little to wage changes as the household lives thanks to his labor income. On the other hand, a secondary earner will have a more elastic labor supply as their labor income is not needed as much. So, if they find an opportunity that pays more than their reservation wage, they might suddenly decide to go from not working and taking care of the family at home versus working part-time, maybe 10 hours a week. So they will tend to react to wage changes more strongly by adjusting their working hours or entering and exiting the labor market if the wage gets higher or lower than their reservation wage. Those empirical estimates are, not that old, but they're not that recent either. The trend has been decreasing over time, where now in modern households, both partners are equally active, and there are some cases where the woman earns more than the man, and she is the primary earner of the household. But this highlights the more general idea that if some people are living together and are sharing resources, the primary earner will have a lower elasticity of labor supply because his or her labor income is the one the household counts on to properly function. Now, I want to talk about the self-sufficiency project. The self-sufficiency project is a welfare program that consists in providing a generous, time-limited earnings supplement available to single parents who had been on welfare for at least a year and who subsequently left welfare and found full-time work. That's Wikipedia's description. So the program provides monthly payments to long-term welfare recipients if they leave the income assistance program for full-time employment within 12 months of becoming eligible for the supplement. So, here is the way the program works. If a participant does not work, he is receiving welfare benefits. If he works at least a certain amount of hours per week, then he gets a wage subsidy. At the amount of hours, he gets a benefit, which is then clawed back at a 50% rate until reaching the old budget constraint. So let's go over the case where the self-sufficiency program induces a welfare recipient to take up the program and start working. So first, we need to include the self-sufficiency project into the budget constraint. The way it works is as follows. If the individual doesn't work, he receives welfare, which is clawed back at 100% until Y-mean is being reached with the corresponding amount of hours worked. Then our individual works a certain amount of hours, and once he works a sufficient amount of hours, he gets a jump in his budget constraint. He gets a sudden benefit, which then, little by little, is clawed back at a rate of 50% until the amount of hours worked equals the benefits plus the amount of hours worked. So, once our individual works an amount LSSP, he gets a jump in his budget constraint, and any extra hour that he works, he's gonna have to pay 50% of the money earned back to the government until he reaches the old budget constraint. So, since eligible candidates for the SSP are individuals who were not working before, then our individual initially is located here, where leisure is equal to full-time. Then, learning that he might get eligible to the SSP if he works a certain amount of time for a year, then he can predict what his budget constraint is going to look like in the future. And thanks to this bump at LSSP, the budget constraint suddenly increases and our individual is able to reach a higher indifference curve by working an amount LSSP than by not working. So here we are in a case where the individual wants to start working and is going to work an amount LSSP to benefit from the SSP benefit. Now, it is still possible that some individuals will still not want to work, even knowing about the prospects of the SSP benefits. If the individual has high preferences for leisure, which are illustrated by very vertical indifference curves, then his reservation wage will be too high and the self-sufficiency program will not be enough to induce the individual to work. With those preferences, 1 extra hour of leisure means giving up a lot of consumption because leisure is highly valued. So this is how it's going to look like. The budget constraint is the same and might jump with the SSP, but our individual still reaches a higher indifference curve by not working. Working any positive amount of hours would require to find an indifference curve that touches the budget line one way or another, and that would correspond to a lower indifference curve. Hence, there are still some individuals which will not be interested in working positive amount of hours to receive these benefits. Here, to induce this person to work, we would need the benefit to jump all the way to here. And maybe then the individual will be indifferent between not working and working LSSP to receive the benefit. And the benefit would have to be even higher for the individual to strictly prefer working over not working. Can the self-sufficiency program induce to work less? Well, it can't, because all the eligible individuals are welfare recipients in the first place. So they are people who do not work. So agents who do work already will not be eligible for the self-sufficiency program. So their budget constraint will stay straight, will stay on the red line, and will not move to the orange line. Some individuals who do not work might still not want to work because the benefit is not good enough. Others might start to find it worthwhile and might decide to work a positive amount of hours. The SSP is still under trials in different states. The main question is always, how much does it cost relative to how much are the benefits? At least here, it does not induce to work less. So any money spent will be money spent on somebody who will have started working. So let me do a quick summary of the labor economics lecture and tutorials. Individuals face a labor-leisure trade-off. Labor earns money and allows consumers to afford consumption. But on the other hand, labor is painful and decreases utility. The other side of labor is leisure. It increases utility, but it doesn't earn money. So the trade-off is between something painful that brings money and something fun that doesn't. The trade-off will be dictated by the opportunity cost of leisure. What somebody is giving up on by taking an hour off. Often, this opportunity cost will be the wage, the highest wage that somebody could be making if he was working rather than having fun. Standard labor supply theory maximizes the utility of a consumer subject to a budget constraint and a time constraint. After all, we don't have an unlimited amount of time at our disposal, so our time will be divided between labor and leisure. If the individual finds it optimal to work a positive amount of hours, then we are going to have an interior solution where an indifference curve will touch the budget line at only one point, the highest possible point, which corresponds to a positive amount of hours worked and a positive amount of leisure. Any corner solution, either here or here, would mean that the individual either prefers to work full-time, in particular if he doesn't value his leisure a lot. That would correspond to an indifference curve which is very, very flat, very horizontal. Or our individual might prefer not to work, in which case the indifference curve is going to be very vertical, and the only point where it's going to touch the budget line will be here at the corner, where leisure is equal to T, the total amount of hours available. In these cases, we won't have a tangency condition, we're going to have a corner solution. We went over two different welfare programs that aim at increasing labor supply. The first one, called welfare, consists in giving a benefit to an individual and taking this benefit back as soon as an individual is working. We saw that it doesn't give any incentive to work, because whether an individual works 100 hours for $10 an hour or 0 hours, if the benefit is $1,000, his income at the end of the day will be $1,000 whether he works or not. Since working decreases utility, our agent will simply prefer not to work. The second welfare program we went over was the negative income tax program, where a benefit is given to an individual, and for any extra hour worked, the government doesn't get all the money coming from that hour worked back, but rather a certain percentage. This way, it might give an incentive to some individuals to work more, because not only they will get the benefit from the government, but they will keep a fraction of the extra money they make by working. We also saw that there are some individuals who still prefer not to work at all, and there are some who prefer to decrease the amount of hours worked to be able to benefit from the negative income tax program, even though they were not benefiting from it before. Empirical studies show that overall negative income tax costs more than the benefits, because there are more agents who reduce their hours and to benefit from the program than there are individuals who work more in order to benefit from the program. So the net effect is that there is a reduction in employment. The self-sufficiency project is an interesting alternative, because by targeting only people who were at welfare before, it cannot induce less working. Those who work already will not be impacted by the program. The program will not apply to them. Some who were not working before might find it worthwhile to now start working and to benefit from the program. Others, of course, might still value leisure so much that they will still not work because the benefits from the SSP are not high enough. That's it for this tutorial on labor economics. Have a good rest of your week and see you in the next one. Bye.